All right. Well, welcome to the Happy Practice. I'm Natalie House, and I'm your host today. And I'm joined by Christina Powell. And Christina, I'll let you jump in and give everyone a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. So thank you for having me. My name is Christina Powell. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Florida and also a licensed professional counselor in Texas. I have a private practice, mental perk therapy, that I provide individual psychotherapy for a myriad of issues, but primarily for executives, corporate level workers, perinatal concerns, and then also specifically anxiety, which kind of molds in between the two specialty areas. And I've been a clinician for about 10 years and looking forward to talking about healthcare workers and all the different ways that they have to entertain mental health within their realm. As I was formerly working in a hospital prior myself. So I have a little inkling of how people might feel in those domains.
That's great. And we were so excited to talk to you because part of your practice is really focused on leadership and the dynamics around management and running teams and the culture of business. And our customers are generally, they're healthcare practitioners and healthcare staff, but they're also running a business and business owners and entrepreneurs a lot of times. And so, one of the things I wanted to start with is just talking about, being a business owner or, the leader of a business. And what are some common stressors or issues that business owners and leaders face when they're as a leader, what are some of the things that are common in terms of anxiety or fear or stressors at the sort of like the top level?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of the alienation piece for me that comes up the most, as far as not really having a sounding board anymore, especially if you were promoted into those roles. But even if it was your own business, it's the idea that like I'm responsible. I'm so inundated with this pressure on my shoulders to be responsible for the not only my own livelihood, but the livelihood of others. And so when we think about how that works in terms of loneliness, the impact of feeling alienated, the impact of not being able to communicate with people in your charge, that would make it very difficult to go into decision making, into conflict resolution, and then to challenge your own self of, well, what does this mean for me, not just fiscally, but emotionally and physically as well? So taking all components of what it takes to run a business and being an entrepreneur is really important for that leadership role because it trickles down and it's a big trickle effect in how the whole of your operation really works.
Let's talk a little. You mentioned communication. I want to talk a little bit more about that. I think communication is really important. What are some of the most effective strategies you've found to help leaders enhance their communication and maybe lessen the negative impacts downstream?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is to be an introspective leader. If you don't take the time to figure out how you feel about something, and if you don't try to work on that mindfulness yourself, then what we're operating off of is immediacy. And then we're not really cultivating the ideation that we really want towards all the rest of the people in our charge. And truly, that introspective piece is something that I don't think a lot of people do. Not,
Hmm.
it's very rare that somebody goes, oh, yeah, I meditate every day. Or, yeah, I journal every day. Or I take stock in what happened to me this day and I put it all on paper and I evaluated it. So, as a leader, it's so important to lead by example. And if you're doing some of those things, then I think it really helps them to be effective in terms of their vision, because that's the biggest thing. You're building a business, you have a vision for yourself and for others. And so it's kind of like, what's the mindscape look like? The same way that you would create a vision board, a manifestation board, something that would showcase what you really want, that you're passionate about. When you don't do that in your own mind, you're really limiting yourself in terms of how you can learn to shift and be flexible, which is such an important component of being a leader.
Many of our customers and practice owners find it challenging to, have work-life balance. So they're very busy. They are generally seeing a lot of patients, a lot of clients, and they're in the unique position, I think, of being the leader and the business owner, but also the talent and the person that's
Mm.
actually, practicing. And what advice do you typically offer to help people with that, that question of work-life balance and how they could maybe set an example for their teams who are also busy as well? I think maybe this is something that everyone's trying to find.
Yeah, I think certainly it's a challenge, right? It's very challenging to balance yourself because what does balance look like? The thing is balance changes all the time. So what you did in the beginning of your practice to create and make it successful is probably not what you need to do 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Yet we get very steady on our processes and we just don't divert. So it's that evaluation piece, constantly evaluating what that work life balance looks like to you and noticing the patterns in which you feel irritated, angry, if you feel burnt out, if you feel stressed, and where can you take the steps back? Typically, when you start and you're the talent and you're the owner and operator, you don't have anywhere to divert your attention. You're starting from scratch. And so, as you build out a team, what typically ends up happening is people don't know how to delegate. And when you can't delegate that work, well, if you are overly stressed, they're overly stressed because they don't know what you need if you're
Yeah.
not communicating that need. So I think it folds into that ideation of how can you prevent further conflict through communicating better, but understanding yourself first in order to communicate that. So it's a big line that you have to kind of go through. And then also recognizing business needs change the same way that you change offices and you change staff around if they're not fitting the need of the business. If you're going in and um, you're back to backing all your patients all day, every day, and you don't consider bringing on another team member to help you out with that, that's bad news bears. That's not
Yeah.
going to go very well, right? So it's that constant evaluation piece of not just the staff that assist you, but then what does it look like to build other talent and put them in place and still be lucrative and still have your time and still feel like you're shining at work, but then maybe taking a step back so you can still shine in your personal life as well.
Yeah. That's such great advice. And that introspective leadership and really knowing yourself, how critical that is. Do you have any techniques that you recommend? Are there daily practices or things that you found have worked for your clients to be mindful of that and revisit it often before maybe burnout starts to happen?
I think any business owner can benefit from therapy. And I say that as a therapist, so I know people will have a caveat to that. But I do think that there is just this wonderful sensation of having somebody who doesn't have any skin in your game, is, capable of looking at your full value of what's going on, who you are, building that relationship with you so that you feel that comfort level to express what's going right and what's going wrong. Um, I think that there's so many aspects to leadership that ends up being really challenging because you believe you don't have any time. But we never have enough time. That's a human experience. That's an existential crisis, truly. So
Hmm.
the more I believe in the fact that you can make time for things like what we just discussed, meditation, journaling, that introspective work either through therapy or on your own, even if you don't know how to do some of those things, there's a billion YouTube videos on how to do it. Or there are guided journals, there are guided meditative practices. Um, My favorite thing to ask somebody is to use Socratic questioning, and a very simplistic version of Socratic questioning. What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What's the most realistic? Evaluate your circumstances so that you can kind of evaluate if do you have biases in place? Are there things holding you back personally that hold you back professionally? And it's such a simple tool, but it really helps put into perspective what's the best case scenario? I make a gajillion dollars. What's the worst case scenario? I fail and my business goes completely under. And what's the most realistic? I might need to work at this, but I can probably achieve some financial success here.
Yeah.
How easy to recalibrate your brain just by three simple questions. And so I really love that as like a very useful tool just immediately off the bat. But then that work all alongside of like learning yourself, learning those trigger points and finding out how you can curb those things. And sometimes that's through coaching, sometimes that's through therapy, and sometimes a combination of both.
Awesome. So let's talk about how could you, or what are some signs or ways to things to look for, before you're completely burned out, before you're kind of you've had it. What are ways to, or what are some signs for burnout that you could look for? I think both if you're, obviously if you're the owner or the practitioner, a leader, what should you look for in yourself, and what should you also look for in the people that are on your team or on your staff? Just to maybe start to recognize things before they become really, sort of like too far.
Yeah, I think it starts from the get-go of hiring. You wanna find somebody who aligns with your vision, and sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And unfortunately, some people are very good at building their facades so that they can, cultivate what they want out of their careers. Um, but if we talk about stress and burnout, they're kind of two different things, and they get lumped together very, very often. And so when we look at stress, stress is very overt. Cortisol in your body is keeping you in an adrenaline state, an anxious state. And how does that actually manifest into your behaviors? Well, you might actually be pretty motivated to get something done because you're stressed out. You might actually use stress as a mechanism. How many people work very well under pressure? And then it's like I need that time pressure in order to get, my
Hmm.
studying done or my job done. That's stress, right? And so it's a horrible manifestation of motivation because it's stress
Right.
on the body, but it still actually is a great tool sometimes to get things done. So that part of stress is really interesting. Stress also can come out in irritability, in mood shifts. It's a little bit more physical. A lot of people end up with gut problems or they end up feeling very cerebral about it and they can't kind of get over the idea of whatever is plaguing them. Whereas burnout is a little bit more despondent. Burnout is starting to step
Mm,
back and feel a little less inclined to do a good job, feeling a little inclined to think that there's a purpose to what I'm doing. That
mm.
disengagement factor. The mood shifts also more in a tone of cynicism. What are
Yep.
we even doing here? Um, and hopelessness that it's going to get any better. And so all those factors I think apply to both camps, the leadership and whoever is underneath them. And for leadership, the hard part is that you might manifest that sooner than your workers because
Yeah.
your stakes are much higher. And so again, going back into that introspective piece, I think is so valuable to think about ingraining in your being in your work because if you can't recognize your own burnout, you're not going to recognize your workers' burnout and it's going to trickle down because they're going to see and really vibe off of what you're giving and then that's going to create you problems as well. um, and that's not to say that these things are anybody's fault. This is all manifestation of how important some of these things are to folks. When you create a business, it's so important to you. You don't just have risk in one area of your life. You're taking on sometimes personal risk, sometimes you have collateral against your own home to build a business. There's all sorts of reasons why the stakes are high, but that means that it's even higher if you don't take into account your mental health and your mental state. Um, as far as the workers underneath a leadership, either a lot of leadership or a singular leadership type of business, I think it's when the harder piece about that is that then there tends to be a lot of peer relationships and an emulation between peer relationships. If your coworker is talking to you all day, every day negatively about how much this place sucks, you start to chime in. All of a
Mhm.
sudden, your belief system is that this place sucks, and then you guys are creating kind of like a chaotic environment, even if it's just between the two of you.
Mhm.
Um, and when somebody doesn't recognize that or kind of nip it, what are you unhappy about? If leadership's not asking those questions, not having one-to-ones, not having staff meetings, there's no real communication happening, then we find that toxicity can be pervasive and really throw you under. So it was a very long-winded way to talk about that.
No, that was so great. How, how important do you think it is for leaders to manage their own personal mental health and set an example or, communicate that as a priority in their environments?
I mean, I think it's the utmost important if you want a healthy work environment. Again, if you want to project mental well-being, physical well-being, all of those factors, the thing that we see the most is when you have employee benefits, people go to use them. They enjoy those benefits available to them. So I see a lot of folks who are on an EAP program, an employee assistance program, where their therapy is free, and the amount of people that would not be able to otherwise afford it is really incredible. And so you think about it, it's such a simple, I mean, it's costly, but it's simple. Even if that access is just through your boss saying, I see a therapist. Have you considered that?
Yep.
You build commonality. And when you can build commonality, people can really see a lot more solution focused than they see just their problem. So I think it's really important from a leadership standpoint to stand by what you tell people to. If you are saying, yeah, yeah, I care, I care, I care, and you offer nothing, that also factors into, well, how much of your statement is true? And then you get people wondering. So it's really important to also follow through with what you're saying and to believe in it. Because if you don't believe in it, then I don't want you to be telling people things.
Right.
That doesn't really bode well for anybody. But it we have seen that leadership, if they are capable of being at any level empathetic, any level of having humility, being able to say that they're wrong sometimes, and learning to apologize, there's great benefit to that in the stratosphere of what your work culture is like. So I think top down is mega important as far as how they take care of themselves.
And I guess that really leads me to my last question here, which is how can a leader or an owner create an environment that promotes well-being for their employees and their teams? What are some ways that they can, just set up structures that are healthy for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there are a couple of levels of actionable items that they can do. So one is being accessible, having those one-to-one meetings, having those staff meetings, making sure that you're communicating with your team. Number two is having that capability of being culpable for decisions that impact your staff members. Showing empathy towards your staff members, opening those lines of what can you offer for them to feel more comfortable within the work environment, understanding what the peer relationships look like, not being so far removed from the everyday operation. Um, there's also a specificity of trying to work with your power struggles. And what I mean by that is that often we feel as leadership, we have to show power. Power is great. Power is one sided. Think about any conflict and what power means and what a power dynamic is in a corporate environment. It's a struggle against each other of power and what that can mean for each other. And somebody's always fighting to have more power. If you can kind of break that shackle a little bit and instead look at it as a combined effort of power towards the business and not against each other, then we can really work with this idea that we can be together, we can be collaborative. Instead of using I statements, we're using we statements. And we're really building a bridge where we're all traveling together because you as a leader cannot be successful if everybody else under you is miserable. There, that is a tale as old as time. How many people have turnover? How many people lose great staff because of a terrible middle manager or a terrible person who has just terrorized them throughout their career?
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, sorry, but it's facts, and it's so important to piece that together all the way through. Who is impacting the team? What is impacting the team? If you as a leader can't pinpoint those factors, they lose faith in what you're capable of doing for them. And it speaks volumes in terms of retention when you actually are, and they see you do those things. When they see you pull away somebody who's impacting the team, when they see that you implement factors that really actually help them, when you give them PTO that actually works, when you try to enact on those EAP benefits, those employee assistance benefits, if you actually are pretty flexible, we see that that's a really important factor to people because we don't have any childcare. There's no subsidies for childcare. So you have kids and you have to take them to the doctor's office, but you're scared to even remotely come to your boss about that. And so your kid suffers or you suffer or who's suffering, right? And it's almost always the employee. So those little things are so important. It doesn't have to be huge ordeals, just small tokens of appreciation that really help create a great vibe and energy in your business.
That's such great advice. Yeah, we hear a lot, people don't leave organizations, they leave
Mm,
managers.
yep.
And yeah, I think that's very true. Any other thoughts or anything I missed?
No, I think we covered a lot. I don't know if you wanted to touch on the crisis bit.
Oh, yeah. If you're
Mhm.
comfortable with that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so yeah, I think we hear a lot about we've talked about stress, we've talked about burnout. Let's talk about when someone really may be in crisis and maybe you're going from stress to, you mentioned, feeling more despondent and starting to feel hopeless. How could you recognize if, someone in your organization was really in crisis? And I know that, there's sort of, a self you bring to work that might not be as transparent, but I think it would be helpful for people to understand, you know, things to look for that might not be like on the surface.
yeah, I think the key is that despondence factor that you were talking about. So disengagement, that feeling of being more critical or cynical. Looking for those factors of definite mood change, right? If somebody was cheery when they were coming into work and then all of a sudden they're no longer cheery, that's a great way to at least have a conversation about what's going on and open a door. You're probably, as a leader, not going to find that you're capable of always seeing where to wedge the door open in the conversation. Sometimes people just have things going on in the background that we are not aware of. Um, and so we try to be very, oh, that's their personal business. I don't want to ask, or I don't want to,
Hmm.
pry. You can give statements that are very, very simplistic, like, "Hey, I noticed you seem down. Is there anything you want to talk about? Hey, I I think, you might be dealing with something. I'm not sure. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I'm here if you need me." And such short little sentences can build that wedge in the door and kind of give you an opening for somebody to open up. And a lot of what ends up happening is that hopelessness, that helplessness, that definite switch in even just body. If I walk in somewhere with a typical, my head is held high, my shoulders are back, I'm good. I present in a physical way that seems like I'm walking normal, I'm doing everything normally. Then you have somebody who's coming in with their shoulders slumped and their head down, and they're listening to, AirPods when they never used to walk into work with AirPods because they're trying to drown out their own thoughts, or they're trying to manifest some sort of motivation to come. Then
Mhm.
you end up seeing that physical manifestation first, I think, more than you might see the mental state change. And that is where I think the crux of what you can do there, as far as wedging that door open to the conversation. And if you don't feel comfortable as a leader because you don't have a great relationship with them, then it's about talking to your middle managers or your office managers, whoever is there next to them, constantly with them, to have that one to one. And then don't leave it with them, make it your problem too. And you'll be able to really capture a lot of people, who are going down the road of crisis. And just one caveat to crisis can mean a lot of different things. And in this context, I think it's just this ideation that work is creating a challenge for them, and they're leading them either to quitting, to feeling absolutely stuck as a cog in this machine, or even worse, that they're having a mental health crisis that they can't combat because of a combination of work and life.
Mhm.
So it can be very different manifestations of how people present, but you're going to want to look for those bodily changes in comparison to who they were prior. And then also those mental states. If you're constantly talking in your office and they are not talking anymore, or they don't want to talk or chit chat or be at lunch with everybody, then those are really great ways to, you don't have to ameliorate the crisis for them. I want to take that ownership off of anybody who is not a mental health professional, but to build a bridge, build something that can give this person at least an opening to talk about what's going on, and show that you care.
Yeah, I think that's so great just to ask that very simple question of, I've noticed something or, how are you doing?
Mhm.
And if I think if you have the structural resources and support that if someone does need professional help that they know that it's available. I think the combination of those two things is so powerful. So,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your time and insights. I think this is so invaluable to anyone who is managing a team or leading an organization. Um, and may we all be more introspective. I think
Yeah,
that's such a huge thing to just be thoughtful about and mindful of, how we are at work and what we want and communicating better.
I 100% agree. I think it's a fabulous way to just enter into the wealth of mental well-being. Just learning about yourself. What are your emotions? How do they tie into who you are and what your behaviors are? Classic. Classic psychological
Yeah.
tools.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
No, thank you.